Hello, welcome to another TOG chat. I'm Robert Osborne, principal of the Osborne Group, joined by my colleague Laurel McCombs. Hey, Laurel, how are you?
Good. How are you, Bob?
I'm doing well. Happy holidays. We're recording this right before the holiday break. But we're going to talk, I think, today about kicking off the new year right. So, get ready. We got lots of thoughts, lots of thoughts on this. Yeah, so when you think about, I think January after the rush of the holidays and everybody is doing those last minute actions that are hopefully going to bring in those last dollars, and as you sit in your office and hopefully just watch the money roll in right until December 31st, and now it's January 1st. Phew, we can relax a little bit, or can we? So, what should we what should we be thinking about after the holiday rush? What comes to mind for you, Laurel?
Yeah, I think you hit on a really key point, which is I think really from I would say November and December, I think is such a rush of activity. Like we have events to do, and we have end of year appeals to send out, and we have stewardship things to do, and there's just so much things we're doing that hopefully we planned out really well early in the fall and are just executing on our plan for the end of the year. That I'm not sure that there is a ton of time this time of year for much reflection or analysis of results. And so I think regardless of whether folks are finishing up their fiscal year at the end of December, or if you're kind of maybe at the midpoint of your fiscal year, if you're on like a June, July fiscal year, I think regardless, January to me always feels like the perfect time to come back and assess kind of what you've either done, what you did last calendar year, or what you've done in the first half of your fiscal year, and take some time to really look at your data, look at your metrics, look at your results, do that quantitative analysis of, look at some of your response rates from your appeals that you've sent out, look at some of your yes to ask rates for some of your mid-level and major gift stuff, but then also look at the qualitative data. So, just take a temperature check of your team, take a temperature check of your board, take a temperature check of just how did people feel about the execution of your plan. Because I think a lot of times we put a plan in place and we just go. And I think this is a really good time to just check in and be like, how did it go? Did we execute on the plan the way we thought we did? Was it easier than we thought, harder than we thought? Right. Did we Goldilocks it right? Did we get it just right? So both kind of that quantitative and qualitative assessment. I think, and two, it's just like before you jump into anything new, right? Like I think it's just a good time to reflect.
Yeah, I love that. I think I 100% agree with you. Yeah, you have like what, 3 or 4 weeks where the demand isn't there the way it probably has been since the summer, on your time. And it's a great time to, and I think this is exactly what you're saying, to kind of be strategic and not just reflect, but like think about the things that you maybe can't think about the rest of the year because you're just go, 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 go. So looking at those metrics, maybe taking, not just looking at them, but like thinking about, well, what do they mean? What can I do differently? What are the implications for the rest of the year? Regardless of what fiscal year you're on, most likely you got most of your gifts, like a good chunk of your gifts, right, over the last 3 or 4 months. And so taking stock and looking and saying, okay, who didn't give? Like I remember when I was director of development for a variety of different organizations, that was the first thing I did. Like who didn't give last year, and what can I do to get those folks back? Because I think the cardinal sin of fundraising, maybe the only cardinal sin of fundraising is, did you not ask everybody? That should be asked, right? And making sure that everyone who, all of your annual donors were solicited in some way, and if some of them haven't given, to maybe make that approach, right? Making mid-course corrections, looking at that data. And because, yeah, you're gonna be right back into it, right? Probably February 1st or thereabouts. Maybe you only have 2 or 3 weeks to really kind of do the analysis, to really think about things, and then it's another drive to basically Memorial Day. I think when you really think about the fundraising calendar, what are we talking about? We're talking about, maybe February 1 to May 31st, and then September 15th to maybe December 15th. Is actually a pretty short window. The other thing I think about, and I know you think about it too, is stewardship, and this being a really good time to like take a look at everyone who has given over the last, since whenever you last sent a stewardship mailing out, an impact report of some kind. January is a great time to still engage with your donors, but in a way that doesn't involve a solicitation. They've given, they're tired of being asked. They've probably given to a lot of different organizations. Certainly, probably your average person's been asked by what, 100 organizations, maybe more over, maybe that's just for December. I don't know. It could be quite a bit, when we look at a longer term. So really letting donors know that they've made a difference. And of course that starts to tee you up for the solicitations that are probably going to come in the spring. And so that's what I think about too, is like what kind of stewardship can I do, in January and even into early February, to give myself the best chance for having like a successful fall.
Absolutely. We never stop talking about stewardship, and I still think it's the core issue when we look at retention numbers, not just within individual organizations, but when we look at retention numbers across the sector. And I am reminded at this time of year how poor I'll say the universal nonprofit sector, we are at stewardship, when I am receiving so many solicitations to organizations that I have given to before. And this is the
Mm,
first time I'm hearing from them all year long. And I have
interesting.
no idea what they've accomplished. I mean, like they'll say a little bit of what they accomplished in the solicitation letter, but to be honest, I'm not really paying attention because I'm just irritated that I just got a solicitation again from them when I haven't heard anything else from them since this time last year when they sent me a solicitation. And and to your point, in addition to the, I don't know, probably, yeah, 50 between email and snail mail, like the 50 new donor acquisition mailings I've gotten to people I've never given to before, right? And so I just think, yeah, go steward, folks. Go tell people what you did last year. Go tell people what the impact of their gift was last year. And then, I'll throw a nod in there about engagement. Go tell them what the next thing they can do with you is,
Mm,
that's not giving money, that is coming to a happy hour, that is coming to a programmatic event that's open to folks, that's volunteering for something, that's giving advice or feedback on something. We have another video on the blog that talks about different ways you can engage folks, but this is also a really great time to do that brainstorming on what are your engagement opportunities going to be this year. What are the things that people can do with you that are not just giving you money all the time. So yeah, I've been, I'm just, can I say something blasphemous on our little
please.
show? I am so tired of
Absolutely.
new donor acquisition mailing. I'm so tired of it. Like
Say more.
there has to be another way. And I think we've talked about this in terms of engagement of donors, that mass communications has its role in keeping you top of mind for people, reminding people about what's going on, but it is not the thing that is gonna, maybe it will retain some folks. It is certainly not upgrading folks. And it is certainly not working for acquisition. And I, you know what, somebody's watching this from some big national organization and they're gonna be like, well, it works for us, Laurel. Look at your numbers. Like when average return rates on mass new donor acquisition mailings are 2%, and you are spending more money to do those mailings than you are getting back, knowing that it's an investment. But here's my thing, Bob. I have so many folks who will defend mass direct mail new donor. And again, I'm talking about new donor acquisition, right? Will defend mass new donor acquisition because it's a long-term investment. Yes, we spend money on that, but we get it. Do you? Because what's your retention rate with those donors? So until you can show me lifetime giving and retention on those donors and actually show me how it's paying you back, jury's still out. Anyway, that was my rant for the day. I'm done. Um,
I welcome the rant.
I don't
I
know if
hear you.
that
No,
helps
it's
anybody in terms of getting ready for 2026, except to say the three things that we have been harping on for like the last 2 years: trust, engagement, and stewardship. All three of those things, as you go into 2026, like every single thing you do should accomplish all three of those things. And if it's not accomplishing at least one of them, don't do it. And you tell me how new donor acquisition direct mail accomplishes trust, engagement, or impact. Any of those three things. So there we go.
Well, maybe we should have picked that subject today,
Well,
Laurel.
and
That's a good that's a
I
good
know,
a good rant.
right?
But I
Future,
think
future TOG chat topic.
yeah, well, I think it would be an interesting thing to dive into, and just to kind of circle it back to, today's topic. I think that's part of the analysis, and I think people don't always. I think analysis means different things to different people, and I think for a lot of groups, it's just kind of looking at the lapsed donors, and which is, you should do that. Like, that's your easiest money, right? You should absolutely do that. But yeah, I mean, I'm always struck, you and I speak a lot, and I think both of us have been speaking a lot about pipeline and retention, and just sort of like how do all your programs sort of work together, which acquisition is certainly, an important part of that. And to your point, when you have, you know, 2%, I think is generous, right? In terms of
Mhm.
whether response rates to direct marketing, increasing evidence that, that maybe your first year retention rate, average retention rate in the country has maybe decreased from like the low 20s into the low teens. Like, I think you and I have both seen more than one report now that that is suggesting that that's the case. It makes me think that might be real, like, or certainly that things are trending in the same direction, and really understanding what that means. And it can be as basic as, looking at your return on investment. Like, it can be as basic as looking at your cost per dollar raised. It can be, for something like that, really gaming out, like, when do we turn a profit? Like, if you were a for-profit, right, and you're putting investment in, which is a valid thing, but they also would be looking at, is this actually paying off? And the thing about that kind of acquisition too is that there has to be an organization-wide commitment to it, right? Because if anyone along the way kind of deprioritizes it, then all that investment is lost, right? Like, there really has to be a 5-year commitment to, like, at the organization level, that we're gonna invest in this acquisition, we're gonna invest in the stewarding of these acquired donors, we're gonna do the analysis year by year, and we're gonna be able to predict when we start to turn a profit. And it's, I think I speak for both of us when we say that, like, that doesn't tend to happen for most organizations, not consistently, not over, a long period of time. And most of the time, when I say, how many people can tell me their cost per dollar raised, or their, just a different way of kind of saying return on investment, they're not exactly the same number, but they're pretty close. um, most organizations can't tell me. And it's interesting that you mentioned this, Laurel. I know we're getting way off topic, but I think it's an interesting, you know, and longtime listeners to the TOG podcast know that we stay on topic for the most part, but we do we do go off on our occasional occasional rants. Yeah, I just received a proposal that wanted to build a major gift program for a new organization, but it was all through direct marketing. And, I basically wrote the response to the proposal RFP, you're doing it wrong. So we'll see what happens. We'll see.
Well, it's
I did acknowledge to them, like, I recognize we're suggesting a different strategy, but I think there's good sound reasons for why that's the case.
it's like anything else in life, and again, this is, relevant as you think about your planning for 2026. And I think that sometimes we are not very good with our planning efforts of aligning the strategy with our expectations. And I feel like a lot of our conversations with clients are us like balancing expectations for folks, not saying that's a good idea or a bad idea, or you should do this or you shouldn't do this, but rather like just make sure your expectations and what you're trying to get out of this are aligned with what the strategy that you're implementing. And so, for folks, as you're thinking about reflecting on 2025 and thinking about what you're going to do in 2026, I think this is like a really core thing to think about, which is, you know, and I'll use events as an example, right? That I think a lot of people go into events. Some of your events might be purely for stewardship and engagement purposes. You might not, they might have no revenue attached to them, but a lot of organizations have events that are revenue generators first and foremost. And that is for most events like that, that is the metric, right? Like that is the only goal that's listed anywhere in writing as it relates to that event. And if that event doesn't achieve the revenue goals and you kind of start to question cost per dollar raise and return on investment, and is this the right strategy? What we tend to hear are a lot of back end outcomes, right? Like, well, but this is really good for bringing in new people, and this is really good for marketing, and it's really good for word of mouth, and it's really great at engaging and stewarding our existing donors. And I'm like, awesome. I love that it does that, but can you anticipate and set an outcome ahead of time that that's one of the reasons you do this, and that, and then be able to track, like, so if in fact you're going to say, well, no, we have to keep this because it's really good stewardship for our existing donors, great, show me some retention numbers for the people who come to this event, right? Like, no, don't kind of justify a strategy because you just don't want to go through the change management of getting rid of it. But if in fact it does those things, then right now, when you're planning for that event this year, list it as an outcome. In addition to the revenue, say, we also will steward existing donors. We expect to bring in X number of new folks. We will, we have marketing goals, right, for this. State those outcomes because it will impact the way you plan for that event. Because now you're not just planning for how are we going to get as much money in the door as we can. We are now also planning for how will we hit these other goals that we have stated are important for this, right? And suddenly now, then, if when the revenue goals aren't what they are, you can measure whether or not it is doing the other things that you said it was going to do, and then you can make a more informed decision about whether or not this is the right strategy for you. So, again, this kind of like using this pivot point in the year to say, like, let's really look at this and be honest with ourselves about ROI, about, and ROI including staff time, and just not just time, but like staff, just like exhaustion levels from some of these things, And so, and then factor that in as you're going into your 2026 planning.
I think you're saying, intentionality, and I think that's part of being strategic is thinking about, I think there's two sides, and this is something that you can all do in January, right? Like, what are we doing for the rest of whether this year or the rest of the fiscal year, whatever, like to your point, what do we expect to get out of it? And then setting some goals around that and then measuring whether you did them or not. And right, like you said, not kind of retroactively justifying what you've done, but like understanding what you've achieved and then being honest about did you achieve it or did you not, and really looking at those numbers. And again, it can be as basic as just the cost per dollar raised, right? Like just as a metric, as basic as retention, and like these are I would say like if you just started if every not-for-profit we encounter just started doing measuring their cost per dollar raised and return on investment and their retention rates and across various channels and categories of donors and by years given, I mean, that would be a game changer, right? There's lots of other things you can dig into, but just that alone is going to tell you so much about the health of your program. Um,
And
I
just
think the
answer
last
the
thing that I
question.
really think of
Oh, I
what's
should say, and just answer the question of like, are we spending our time wisely, right? And are we getting to our goals? And I'll just one thing, just going back to what you said about the major gift proposal, right? Um, think about what your big goals are for this year, not just the number you have to raise, but like the big things you want to achieve this year. And for example, if one of the things you really, really want to do is establish a major gift program, and then you look at all of your strategies and they're all mass communication, not personal, low engagement, low impact driven strategies, you're not going to build a major gift program. So either decide you're not going to build a major gift program or change your strategies.
There you go.
Laurel just
No, I agree.
telling it like it is today.
It's I we welcome it. No, it's all very good advice, very practical. Like we've both been talking about this at conferences quite a bit, and I've been having these conversations, and it's real. I think you've hit on something. Like when I get an RFP that expects to build a major gift program purely through digital marketing, that to me says what's out there in the ether, right? And how people are thinking about it and how we're all being encouraged to think about it, which in our mind, we look at that and we're like, wow, it doesn't take much math for us to kind of prove that this isn't the way to go, but we're not oriented that way, a lot of organizations. So
Well, and again,
if the rant gets people to think about that a little bit,
well, and I will
then I
say, I have a tendency to be hyperbolic, and I will, cop to that. But like, and this is in no way, I think, us saying like, don't do digital marketing or don't do mass marketing or don't do direct mail. But it is, I think, me saying, know what your expectations are, right? Like, and then measure and then make decisions based on data, not on just like what you hope will happen because you do those
yeah.
things.
No, exactly. I think it would be an interesting topic. We should talk about maybe what good acquisition looks like. So we'll file that away for like a future TOG. Maybe we'll talk about that the next time. For me, the last thing that I think about, and I don't know if you think about it or not, this is just something that I've thought about, is I think about my board and I think about what more I could be doing with them. And again, that just kind of goes into the category of sort of being strategic. I think a lot of times depending on who you are and the state of your organization, your board may be like amazing and extremely well integrated into your fundraising program. But I think for most people, you know, it varies from everything. Like a few people are in or can fit into that category to it's a bunch of people we have to deal with, but I'd rather not, and like my goal is to sort of keep them as at arm's length to whatever extent I can. And for me, I start to think about like how can I get the most because the board can kind of go one way, right? You do have to deal with them. They're there. They're the board. They're not going anywhere. So you can kind of deal with them in a way that's going to be productive, or you can deal with them in a way that's not productive. And for me, I think always find January kind of taking a look, maybe having some board member meetings one-on-one, talking about the rest of the year. What could they help you with in terms of your strategy? I think they can be helpful with acquisition. I think they can be helpful, certainly helpful in terms of stewardship. Maybe some of them can even help you with metrics, and maybe they come from a field or a background where that might be helpful. But like, what is going to make having to talk to this person, these people collectively, worth it for you, where there isn't, a return on investment. And for me, January is always a good time to kind of start thinking about that. Like what is my engagement plan for my board members, and how can I use them to kind of plug into my plans and plug into whatever it is that I need done, and how can I help them? How can I, what can I ask them to do? How can I support them? And what can they help me to do? So I don't know if that's something you think about in January specifically or not, but I found that it's always like a quiet time where maybe you can, it's maybe a little easier to get on people's calendars than it might be, even in February or March.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, just kind of going back to what we were saying about like, regardless of either you've just finished up your fiscal year, and so the board is about to, set their new goals for the year and sign their new commitment letters and all those things. So again, a great time if it's the beginning of your fiscal year to just really establish kind of some really specific clear goals for them, and clear specific, I keep saying that word because I think we are not always very specific with boards. I think we say things like go raise money, go
Right.
introduce people, right? And we need to be like, no, invite people to this thing on the 23rd at 6 o'clock, and I'm going to call on the 15th and remind you to do it, and here's a email with some language.
Your number, right.
um, and so, or if you're in the middle of your fiscal year, again, like having that conversation, which is like, okay, here's where we are and how do we finish the year out strong? And here's, some final things that you can help us to get us, through the finish line. So yeah, I think it's always good. I'm also reflecting on the fact that I think I did 3 board retreats in the last 2.5 months, and have a couple more probably for in the next couple of months planned.
Mhm.
And so, your board may have just had a retreat either toward the end of the year, or might be gearing up for a retreat in the spring. Call us because we'd love to help you with that. But also just think about, I think, again, we don't do retreat planning great. We kind of just are like, oh shoot, the retreat's in a month. What are we going to talk about? And just kind of like cobble it together. Retreats can be really, really powerful motivators and springboards for things. They can also just be like a day that I took off work that I'm not sure what we really accomplished. And so, you know, again, whether you just had one or you're about to have one, like what's the follow up? The other thing with the retreats is people will have them, and then people will get like inspired and motivated and be really excited, and then there's no follow up
Yeah.
from it. And so, so think about that, like how you're kind of building around any other kind of board activities like retreats or things like that.
Yeah, I second that as a board member who's been to quite a few retreats, always on the day long, inevitably going to be the most beautiful day of whatever time period that is. And then, right, no follow-up, goes nowhere, was pointless. Yeah. So
And it's almost
I'll
worse
leave
to have like
it.
a really, really good retreat
No, it's
that,
it's
that
made
doesn't
me
follow up
mad.
on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's demotivating. But that's maybe another subject too. So let's I think we've generated some good future topics to talk about, Laurel. But I think for this one, let's call it now. Let's call it here. If we wish everyone a happy holidays if you're listening to this before the holidays, and if you're listening to it afterwards, we hope that you had great holidays, and we wish you a happy new year. And we look forward to talking to all of you in 2026. And as always, if we can be of service with fundraising, strategic planning, opinion research, we're here. And please get in touch with us at mail@theosmondgroup.com, or if you have Laurel and my email addresses, you can get us that way. So, happy New Year, Laurel. Happy holidays, and we'll see everyone in 2026.